The year 1982. The setting, England. Acorn Computers of Cambridge had quite a success on their hands with the previous year's BBC microcomputer system. With the backing of the BBC, Acorn's machine instantly made a name for itself and ended up seeing major success in the education market. But with a price of several hundreds of pounds, it wasn't nearly as ubiquitous in the home market. By 1982, competing machines like the Sinclair ZX Spectrum and Commodore 64 were invading English homes in mass numbers due to several reasons, but mainly because they were A, less costly, and B, had plenty of games to choose from. The BBC had neither of these points in its favor, so Acorn got to work on a cut-down version of the Beeb, and in 1983 came up with the Electron, affectionately known as the ELK. It emulated much of the BBC Micro's capabilities with a single custom ULA chip, and had the same 32K of RAM, but there were limitations as far as sounds and graphics compared to the BBC. And though it had some initial setbacks due to manufacturing issues, the Electron eventually sold rather well, being the third most popular UK Micro at its peak, eventually even outselling its big brother, the BBC Micro. There was pretty much only one Electron model, so you won't be getting confused looking at tons of hardware revisions. However, you may run across machines with various add-ons included, like the +1 and +3 interfaces and different slogger boards. These are nice, but not required for normal operation. My Acorn ELK is yet another donation by UK Retro Games, so once again, Mark, I thank you kindly. Looking on eBay though, I've seen them go for anywhere from about $10 to $40 US, and of course being from Great Britain you'll have to take into account shipping costs if you don't live there, but it's a really affordable machine to acquire. As mentioned, the ELK is essentially a cut-down version of Acorn's BBC Micro, and taking a look at it externally you can see the resemblance. You get pretty much the exact same keyboard minus the separate function and arrow keys. The full-stroke keyboard gives a completely acceptable tactile experience, not quite the same feel as the Beeb, but similar to the original Macintosh and miles better for typing than the Spectrum. Unlike the BBC, it has lots of basic commands printed right onto the keys for quick input, and it still has the incredibly awesome BBC Basic built into its ROM for a pleasurable programming experience. On the side you have an RGB monitor output, cassette input, and RF and composite monochrome video outputs. Since I don't have an RGB monitor or a PAL TV, mine has been modded to output composite video in color through the composite port. There is no audio output, so all you have is the internal speaker for sound. On the rear, you have the Electron exclusive expansion port for adding things like the +1 interface for optional printer and joystick support. While it is possible to load programs from floppy disks, you need some add-ons to accomplish that. So at first, you'll do best to stick with its dominant storage medium, the cassette tape. The Electron uses the exact same 1200 baud cassette interface and cable for loading software as the BBC. All you need is a decent tape recorder and you're ready to load software. Although if you can get a recorder with a remote input, either a third-party one or an official one by Acorn, the Electron will take care of controlling it for you, similar to how the Commodore 64 does with its C2N dataset. Another nifty fact about the ELK is that it can use a standard 19-volt AC adapter for power. Since it's a UK machine and uses 220-volt power, and though I have a power converter, I don't own its original power supply. Thankfully, I was able to just use an AC adapter from my Compaq Contura Aero laptop, so I don't have to fool with any conversions that way. It is of course a PAL machine, so its video will output in 50 Hz with PAL color. So I just use a vertical hold adjustable TV and signal converter, or I use it with a USB capture device. It's a lot simpler that way. But what's inside driving all of this madness? Well, much of it is the exact same thing as the BBC Micro, but thanks to the ULA, there's a lot less to see. You still have the same 32K RAM and 32K ROM as the BBC, and there's the uber classic MOS Technology 6502A CPU running at 2 MHz, same as the BBC. But in the ELK, it sometimes runs a bit slower than that due to sharing memory with video display circuits, among other things. Despite some quite capable graphics modes ranging from 2 to 16 colors on screen at once, it lacks the BBC's Mode 7 graphics mode, and the sound is also crippled, with only one channel covering 7 octaves of sound and emulation of a noise channel. But that doesn't mean the ELK isn't capable of a surprising amount of awesomeness. There were hundreds if not thousands of titles made for the machine, and software is easier to find than for the BBC Micro. Like the Beeb and pretty much all UK machines from that time, the games were predominantly on cassette tapes. It sucks there's no built-in joystick support, but whatever, the keyboard is more than adequate if you're used to computer games. Here are some of my top picks. Now, while you can play certain Electron titles on a BBC Micro, for the most part you're not going to be able to use BBC games and applications on an Electron. So you're going to want to make sure you get the versions that state they do work on an ELK. Thankfully, Electron-specific games are quite easy to come by, and there were tons of them. And although they're not quite as easy to find and plentiful as, say, the Sinclair Spectrum selection of games, you'll still run across bunches of them quite often on eBay. It's also simple to transfer games over to cassette using your modern computer. Just download the games and, using a cassette cable and playback program, record them onto a tape or load them directly into the ELK. And of course, there's always the ever-present emulation option, using emulators like Elculator and Electrim. It does a pretty good job, and although I always prefer the real thing in a perfect world, it is nice to have in a pinch, or when you don't want to wait on tapes to do their loading. So what does it all mean? Is the Acorn Electron worth buying or not? Well, I would say that is a large yes. Large, not the biggest in the world, but pretty large. The main thing, of course, as with any European computer here in America, is the fact that it is European and it requires weird power and a weird video signal, which if you're not equipped to handle that, that's a huge struggle. And the fact that all of the hardware and software is going to be coming from overseas, so you have to deal with that as far as cost and convenience and such. But, you know, if you ignore all that, well, yeah, of course, it's a great little computer. It's got a lot of software, and for the most part, it's not crap. At least the stuff that I have played, it's, you know, just solid all the way around. I wish it had more things, more options like disk drives and joysticks without a huge hassle for getting interfaces and such. But if that's really a concern, I would say go ahead and get a BBC Micro. You know, the Model B can be had for a relatively affordable price, although you start getting into a lot more with that machine because it does have all of those extra options and, you know, maybe not as many games. I don't know if it's not as many, just as that they aren't as easy to find as the Electron. So, you know, the BBC I feel is more of a commitment, where the Electron is just sort of a fun machine to have, almost toy-like, but, you know, still serious enough that you can really get involved with it and have a lot of fun. It really does remind me a whole lot of the Sinclair Spectrum in that respect. You know, you can pretty much jump right in and start playing a bunch of games and not have to worry too much about it after that, because you're not going to put a ton of money into it. So, you know, take it for what it is. I like the Electron. I recommend it to anybody, period, because it's just fun.